Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the three-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello, welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. This is the Wednesday Twilight Show with Todd Brennan and Morgan Whitfield. Today is May 22nd, and we are going to be welcoming our guest Luzardi Fisher to look at Harkness, or discussion-based teaching, which is student-centered, student-led. We hope that you enjoy. We hope that you call in.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this is Morgan Whitfield.
And this is Todd Brennan.
It's nice to welcome you today. We're really excited because today we're going to be talking about, one of my favorite pedagogies, and that is Harkness teaching. And I think that Harkness teaching is actually pretty new to some listeners, and to others, they will be really familiar with it. Todd, what do you know about Harkness? Like, what's your conception of it?
So I'm coming in very, very cold. I know from Luzardi, our guest today, and that it's been very effective for her, and particularly in a sixth form setting. And I know that it's very, very exciting, and that I can't wait to hear much more about it.
Okay, that's actually a really good entry point. You know a little bit about it. You know that it's mostly in sixth forms. I actually introduced Harkness when I was ahead of sixth form, and I really, really loved it. But I don't want to pretend that it was an easy journey. But I will say that it was definitely worth it. I thought that we'd start off with just a little bit of an introduction. I love the story of Harkness because it's like a love story. It's basically two guys meet each other on a train, and this is what they created. So if you don't know about Harkness at all, it's basically an educational approach that's very student-centered, it's collaborative learning, and it's all based around small group discussions. And the approach begins with a really modest but key pivot in how we frame education, which is instead of having desks that face the teacher, everyone sits around a table. So the story of Harkness kind of really begins with a man named Edward Harkness. So Ned Harkness actually, he was a really, really amazing philanthropist. And he began Harkness about 90 years ago. He was the inheritor to a really vast fortune that he had from his family because they invested early in Rockefeller's oil ventures. And then when the automobile took off, they became extremely, extremely rich. And he had no children of his own. And so he decided to look at social reform. As a kid, he wasn't a natural student. He remembers walking into classrooms and seeing students sitting in neat lines, the desks facing the teacher who was at a blackboard lecturing. And the pupils would all just have their heads bowed and they'd be taking these notes. And every once in a while, a teacher would snap their fingers and ask a student to recite some rote knowledge. And he hated it. He hated being in the classroom, and he didn't like his education because of that. So what he wanted to do was change that conception of education and to reconceive it. But he was not an expert. So what changed was he was on a train one evening in about 1930, and sitting next to him was a man named Dr. Lewis Perry. And Dr. Lewis Perry just happened to be the principal of a really prestigious private school just outside New York City, and that was a school called Phillips Exeter, which is still an amazing school running today. The men started talking about education, how it was ripe for change, and Harkness said that he really wanted to disrupt the status quo. Perry said that he wanted to take this on, probably because he thought, well, this is a potential great benefactor for our school. So he came up with a plan that he presented to Harkness that he said he thought would do the trick of kind of changing education. He thought he could do like guest speaker series and a student advisor model. And Harkness originally took his ideas and said, do you know what? This is not far enough. This isn't even close to what I wanted. And there's this really fantastic quote that we have just because he wrote letters to Perry afterwards. And he said, "You are thinking of improving an existing institution by building on what you've got now. I'm thinking of something much more radical, so different from methods prevailing here that one could see at a glance that were they were adopted, the whole education system in our secondary schools would not only be changed, but changed enormously for the better." So he did really want something that was sweeping and massive. And so what Perry came back with was the idea of, well, let's make the teacher not in charge. Let's completely change the power dynamics. And he did this by saying, okay, let's look at just having all of the people in the room sit at the same level around a table, and there is no head at that table. So there's no place for a teacher to kind of sit in command and monologue. The students gather around the table, typically or ideally in groups of 10 to 12 alongside their teacher. The table was supposed to serve as like this springboard for open dialogue and active participation and deep engagement in a subject matter. And Harkness really, really endorsed this. He liked this so much that he said, well, let's invest in it. He gave the equivalent of $105 million to Phillips Exeter, and they bought a ton of new buildings. They got a whole bunch of new teachers. They got 25 new teachers to bring down class sizes, and they brought the famous now Harkness tables, which are these huge, wide oak oval tables. So that's kind of the story of how Harkness began, and it's since then flourished. We see it being used in universities like Yale and Harvard. It's used in private schools, and we're starting to see it used more in UK sixth forms as well as a really great way to have dialogic learning. So that's a little bit of an introduction. What did I cover there, Todd? Did I miss out on anything you might have questions about? Do you think you have an idea of where we're at?
Yeah, no, I think I'm kind of with it, and it's reminding me of a couple of other modalities. So I might pick up and ask Lasadi a few things about that in a moment. Should we introduce our excellent guest today, and then get into asking her some really deep questions, because Lasadi is an expert in many things, but in Harkness especially.
She really is. Yeah, go ahead. Let's introduce her.
Okay, so Lasadi Fisher is the head of English at British School Al Kabairat, a very high-performing school in the Middle East, in Abu Dhabi. She must be one of the most qualified people on the whole planet. She's got an MED, an MPQSL, and I think she's finishing her doctorate very soon. Lasadi, you can correct me if I'm wrong there.
No, that's correct.
She's known for delivering high-quality 3PD at lots of events in the region and further afield, and sharing her expertise very, very openly, actually, which is always something I'm impressed by. She's just impressive in general, as you can tell from my introduction. 17 years of experience, and spearheaded Harkness in her school's sixth form, which, as I said, is a very high-performing school and a very high-performing sixth form. Morgan, did I miss anything out? She's amazingly talented. It's hard to kind of fit it all into a quick spiel.
No, I think you've covered it. Luzardi is absolutely astounding. And what prompted us to invite her here today was the fact that I saw her actually give a CPD recently at Research Ed Dubai, where she was talking about Harkness, and it just blew me away. I cannot wait to get some of our questions answered. So Luzardi, why don't you just start by telling us what prompted you to try Harkness? What was the conceptual appeal of Harkness for you?
Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say you guys are way too kind. But thank you very much for having me, and I'll try to live up to these expectations. Right. So for us at BSAC, why Harkness was the reason is because we're very blessed. We're very lucky with really great students, and our students have always been very engaged in their learning, and they're very keen, they're eager. But we really wanted to increase our A stars and A grades at sixth form. And I then kind of set off and I went and did a bunch of research and, I started visiting other schools, just like looking for methods how we can do this. And the thing that I found was Harkness. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? This seems really interesting. Like, giving the ownership of the learning over to the students. And I was like, okay, let's go with this. And then I discovered like that could potentially be the thing that could help our students increase their A stars and A's because the students really had to know their subject. They had to become the masters of their subject. And like one of the phrases I read was like, if you can talk about it really well, you can write about it really well. Now, Morgan, as you pointed out, obviously Harkness is absolutely a verbal based lesson. There's oracy involved in it. So you have to be able to express yourself very articulately. And I think that was like a very interesting thing for our students to learn. The second thing was like, we did notice through COVID, now this could potentially just be a feeling and just a perception that we had, but we felt that our students were not engaging in outside reading as much as they used to before. And we felt that they were very much relying on us, on the teachers, and on the in class reading. And again, because of Harkness's pre reading requisite, we thought that would really help us. And then also, again, still relating to COVID, but when we came back to school after COVID, some of our classes were noticeably, how can I say, like less bubbly. Like they were still engaged, they were still willing to work, but that buzz that you get in a classroom where the kids want to share their ideas, they want to talk to you, they want to talk to each other. We just noticed that was lacking. So it's almost like the students struggled to get talking about their learning. And we kind of felt that in Harkness engages all three of those things. So, number one, putting in the work, the outside work. Number two, knowing your materials and mastering those materials. And then three, expressing your ideas about it. And I have to say, the first few lessons of Harkness are tough, but we'll get onto that later. But the first few Harkness lessons are tough, but you just have to persevere and then they kind of do flow a little bit.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I think that I remember because you and I actually taught at the same school for a bit. I remember those first lessons back, or even the lessons where students were back, but we had them sitting in rows because of COVID regulations. And they weren't allowed to really like turn and talk to each other. And it did feel, again, less bubbly. It was really, really
Yeah.
stilted. It didn't feel like real conversations. And it felt like students kind of, they didn't have that same kind of collegial support that you'd expect to happen in a classroom. So that's really interesting. You mentioned that there's a lot of kind of prep work that a student has to do as well. And I always think it's interesting because I think when we think discussion based teaching, oh, this is going to be easy. We're just going to have a topic and the students will talk about it. But it's really not that simple. Do you want to go into like how you would set up a Harkness lesson, like what that would typically look like?
Yeah, no, absolutely, of course. And I do think you are right. I think when people first hear Harkness, they're like, "Oh my God, this is an easy lesson." And it's like, no, it's not. No, it's not easy for the teacher, and it's not easy for the students. So first, what you have to do is, as the teacher, you've got to select the appropriate material, rich material, if you like, that you're going to give to your students, that they can go away, really engage with. So what we at BSAC have done is we have created Harkness packs. Now, the Harkness packs, we compile like different articles, different research papers, different video links and things that we give to the students. We do update them because obviously with everything in education, the educational landscape is continually changing. So we do update our Harkness packs. But anyway, the kids get issued with this. Then we issue them with prep sheets, which has the guiding question of the Harkness session. And then each subject will have different focus areas, but obviously because I'm head of English, I'll just talk about the English ones. So often it'll have the question, then it will have what would your thesis be? What do the critics say about this? What is the context of it? What are the counter arguments? What are the key quotes? So kids then have to complete these prep sheets prior to the lesson. So it's quite a lot of work for the teacher to actually get the materials ready. Then it's a lot of work for the students to actually complete those prep sheets. And for us, Harkness is a laptop free lesson. So no laptops at all. The kids have to print out their prep sheets and they have to bring those to the lesson. And they obviously come with a pen prepared to obviously add their notes or add to their notes as they are listening and engaging in the conversation.
So it's really quite intensive, actually. So a lot of it is prep heavy. I think that students think that they could just show up and say something, but if you show up unprepared, it's quite obvious right from the get-go, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It very much is. And again, or like I said, because the type of students we have at BSAC, they really do engage with the prep sheets. But what you sometimes have is, especially in the first few lessons of Harkness, you'll have students coming with their prep sheets, and the prep sheets are beautifully completed. Like it's full of notes, full of ideas. But then the students sit there and they kind of look at each other and they kind of look at you and they're like, now what? Like, how do I talk about this? How do you guide this? So that's then obviously the next step, which is again labor intensive because you've got to help the students like how to do this. So what I do is, so we've got whiteboards in our rooms, like really nice big whiteboards where the kids can write on. So what I'll do is I'll rewrite the question on the whiteboard, and there will be pens on the desk, and I'll be like, all right, guys, get up, walk to the whiteboards, and just write the one major thing that you've taken out of your reading material. And then they'll go and they write it, and then they come and sit down. I'm like, okay, look at the whiteboards. What do you see? What do you notice? And then the students kind of start talking, and then I keep quiet. I then kind of let it flow, and the students then kind of take over. But there are several ways you can support the students if they are struggling. Like obviously, you're not going to leave them to flounder. If they are struggling as a teacher, you can interject and you can help them. But you can also assign job cards like to the students, so someone will be the facilitator. It's often best to ask the student before the lesson to be the facilitator, so they actually have time to prepare for it. So I've actually done that a few times. We have selected students who I know would be able to handle that responsibility, and obviously some students are quite keen to do that because they want to have that little bit of guiding power, if you like.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I remember doing sessions like that. So when I was doing Harkness, I remember those first early sessions where students were unsure of their role and teachers were also unsure of their roles. I remember when I was training for Harkness, actually, we had someone come in who was a really experienced Harkness facilitator. And he had all of us teachers like sit around in a big circle, and he just gave us the prep sheets ahead of time. And it was for maths. And I think when we think of Harkness, quite often we think it's the humanities, we think of English, but this was a maths lesson. He was a maths teacher. He had a whole bunch of problems, and we just all sat around completely dead silent, waiting for him to start with the Harkness kind of training. And he just sat and waited. And he did this thing where he just paused and he waited and waited until we were brave enough to like find our voices and actually begin the session ourselves. And we were not a shy group, but it took us a while to be like, okay, how are we all going to communicate? How are we going to take turns? Who's going to lead this? Who's going to then like ask the questions or challenge if we've made a mistake here? And it was really interesting because we had to relearn how to collaborate as a group together. And I imagine it's like that for most classes. They have to learn how to actually discuss things and be, I guess, really share and be generous with their time and with their knowledge and to bounce off each other.
Oh, absolutely. But again, like just hearing your story of the training, it like made me think of the training that I attended in Dubai. So we received our prep sheets, very similar to you. We received our prep sheets beforehand, and then we attended the training, and very similar. We were all kind of sat around this table, and again, we were a very bubbly group, very chatty group. And obviously, head of English, maths is not my forte at all. And I just remember sitting there with this maths question, and I looked around and I was like, oh my word, how is this going to work? And people started talking about how they approached the question. I just remember thinking, this is awful. But because the group were so supportive and so lovely, the person sitting next to me was a music teacher. He like looked at me and he's like, so what do you think? And I was like, it's such a basic question, like, what do you think? But it invited me to join in the conversation, and I then started talking about it. It turns out I was completely wrong, but that's not the point. The point is I got involved in it and I shared my ideas. And can I be honest, I was an absolute little nerd when I got my prep sheet. I actually went to our head of maths before the training, prior to the training, to ask him to help me with this. And bless him, he explained it very beautifully, but my little brain just couldn't quite grasp the mathematical terms. But the point is, I had something to talk about at least. And during the Harkness session I was in, I actually learned a lot more than what I did from when the head of maths was explaining it to me. So then I kind of went, oh my gosh, Harkness is truly powerful. That someone like me who is not good at maths at all, that I can learn something from these strangers in a room. And I just thought, if you could harness this and bring it to a classroom where the students do know each other, they know you, and they know the material, just imagine what you can accomplish with that.
That is so empowering.
It's really interesting hearing you talk about that, Sadie, because my immediate thought is kind of about that sort of storming, forming, and norming cycle that we hear about, in terms of the group dynamics. And I know you've touched on there the student role and the teacher role, but do you decide right this week because you're quite a dominant person, you're going to take this role, or is it more of a natural occurrence, or how's that managed from the kind of the teacher's role and the student's role in Harkness?
Yeah, there are so many different approaches, and I kind of like mix up my Harkness lessons. So we do it once a fortnight at BSAC, just because of the intensity of Harkness on the students. We've decided once a fortnight for a Harkness lesson, and with that, then I make sure that we all prepare and we're all ready for it. But I do have different approaches to it. So sometimes I will hand out cards prior to the lesson. Sometimes I won't bring anything into it at all, and I'll just let it flow. Or I will actually ask some students to be silent for the first 10 minutes if they were perhaps talking too much in the previous Harkness session. So there's a whole bunch of different strategies that you can use, and I try to employ all of those.
Luzardi, this is a fantastic start. We're just going to take a short break for our sponsors.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the 3-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
Okay, so we were just talking about the students' roles, and I was wondering, Luzardi, could you tell us a little bit about discussion guidelines and what that looks like in your classrooms?
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to doing the Harkness sessions, we actually discuss with the students what our expectations are of it. This is not the same as you co-constructing the guidelines with students. This is a little bit differently. Like, we actually show the students exactly this is what we expect of you and this is what we want to see in these discussions. For example, we want to make sure that they have eye contact. It is one of the most important things during a Harkness session to actually look at the speaker and not just look at the teacher and not just look at your notes. Look up, make eye contact, look at the person who is speaking, engage with what they are speaking, with the person who's speaking, and listen to what they are saying. And again, body language is incredibly important. We don't want the students to be slouching or slumped in their chairs. We very much want them to sit up straight, engage in the conversation, show the speaker that you are actually interested in what they are saying. So those are like one of the main things that we want. Don't interrupt each other. I know sometimes in a Harkness session it can get a bit heated and students do want to get involved, which is great, but it's just finding a respectful way of doing that. And then, so I actually track the students with apps that are available, or you can just have like a Harkness table drawn on a piece of paper, and then you can like just map how the conversation is going, and you can actually then just monitor that. And if there are any interruptions or such, if you notice that there's a student who's perhaps dominating the conversation, you can then interject and then give that student a timeout. Or if you've noticed there's a student who's really quiet, perhaps you can ask them to engage as well. My year 13s who have just left, who are currently busy with the A-level exams, they were the pioneers of Harkness, and they were fantastic. There was one boy in my class, and he was very, very good at actually pulling in other students. So I didn't have to do it. Like if he would notice in the Harkness conversation, if someone has been quiet, he will often go, "Oh, so and so, what do you think about this?" And he will often like ensure 100% participation as they go along.
That's really fascinating. You mentioned a few things there. The first was that the Harkness tracking sheets.
Oh,
So
yes.
I did Harkness before there were the great apps now that you can use to kind of track who's speaking and how long they're speaking, which is really fantastic. But I use the tracking sheets, which is just the circle with all the students' kind of names with their kind of like little bodies around the table, and you could just kind of track the conversation, who was talking, and at the very end you could see where most of the dialogue was coming from, or going to, which is really, really cool. And it really gives a good idea of like how conversation flows. And I find that that was just this beautiful visual, and we would use that with student debriefs afterwards. Do you want to talk about what you do at the end of a Harkness section, the debrief part?
Yes, absolutely. So at the end of our Harkness sessions, first of all, we do share either the data that was collected on the app, or I actually do quite like doing it by hand sometimes because I feel I can make my notes a little bit quicker. Like I can quickly write a Q or an I for interesting point. And I do share that with the students, and they are so keen to share, to see that data at the end of it. Like they really want to see, oh my God, how many times did I speak? Like, Miss, did we reach like a level of equality? Because I try and explain to them that Harkness isn't about one person dominating the whole conversation. It is about all of us getting involved and all of us, having constructive conversations and being open-minded by it. And that doesn't happen if there's one person dominating the conversation. So sharing the apps or sharing the maps with them afterwards, they really enjoy that. And they like seeing how many times they've spoken, how many questions have they asked, like what percentage of the lesson belonged to them, if you like. So that's really important. And then also at the end of our lessons, we use just a reflection sheet, an electronic one, which I actually collate from all the students. But on the sheet, there are questions like, how did you prepare for today's Harkness? What did you contribute to today's lesson? Who had the best point? Who drove your learning forward? Like, so it's really, again, the students thinking about their learning even after the Harkness session. And then I save those. And then like a couple of weeks down the line, I'll actually show them. I'll be like, right, guys, so we've got like 3 or 4 weeks worth of, or 3 or 4 sessions worth of Harkness data here. Let's just have a bit of a reflection session. Let's look at the data that we've accumulated. And then often you'll find there are some students' names who keep popping up, like this person has really helped me with my learning, or this person has made a really valid point. And then it's also a way for the students to go, you know what, I've done a good job. Like, you know, a little bit of praise, a little bit of well-being for them. Like, you know what, I'm good. I've done a good job. But it also shows them, oh, okay, maybe next time I need to work a little bit harder. Maybe I should, you know, bring my A game a little bit more. So it's
Yeah.
really about empowering them and them taking an active role in the learning process. It's very much, the ownership is all theirs.
I've never seen this at Luzardi, and it sounds absolutely fantastic. What you're talking about there sounds genuinely like setting children up for the future of being in a boardroom or being, you know, in a business meeting of some sorts, or even in a seminar at university, and actually knowing how to be an effective contributor and get real value and give real value in those settings. Can you talk to me a little bit more about this app, but also about, you know, the logic behind, you know, really pushing Harkness to the forefront of what you do, in terms of that, in terms of the next steps for students, because that's really struck a chord with me, actually.
Right. Okay. So the app, as I said, so it is about monitoring the students, monitoring the students' participation, like as I said, so if they're asking questions or if they've made an insightful comment, and often what I'll do is I'll actually make a note of the comment that students have made, especially if it's a good one. Like I might want to refer to it later on in another lesson again, so I might actually bring that up. And the both the app and the map are both really useful for that. So that's really, really interesting. And it also just shows me if students are struggling with a certain topic, perhaps I should go back and maybe reteach that or give them even further reading on that. Because as I said, yes, it is over to students during Harkness lessons, but that doesn't mean that myself as a teacher that I become disengaged at all. I'm very much still involved in it. And I very much still I'm listening to it and picking up on cues like, oh, the students perhaps maybe they've misunderstood that. Maybe I need to go back. Maybe I need to teach that. So it is about continuously improving the learning experience for the students. And as I said, like to really maximize the benefits of the Harkness, we really need to make sure that students know how to do it properly. And you do need to explain it to them, and that does take a few lessons just to explain it to them what it is and how it works. It's not something that happens overnight, and I think people just need to be really patient with it.
No,
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Oh,
no,
sorry. Go ahead,
David,
Todd.
it sounds like there's a long tail on that, and there's huge benefits to that in the long run, with all the benefits that they're going to get in the long term in terms of being in those situations as they go into adulthood. Sorry, Morgan, go on.
No, I was just thinking, well, there's a few things there. The first thing is that I think there's a lot of emphasis put on 21st century soft skills, and that seems to be a very generalized term and we don't really quantify it. The very fact that after every single debrief, you are asking for feedback from students, like what type of conversation, like what type of contribution did I make? Are we getting like a level of depth there? Did I help other students collaborate? Did I allow them to be spring pulled? Was I a questioner or a researcher, a synthesizer? I think all of those things, when you ask students to reflect back on it and then you can quantify it in some way, they can actually see their progress. And you can actually say, oh, we're going beyond, let's say, the core syllabus to looking at real life skills that they will use in the future, in addition to just the content that we're covering. So I find that really, really useful. The other thing I was going to ask was just about training students to be facilitators, because I think we started off when I first did Harkness with students kind of being participants, and we kind of spoon fed them a lot of the discussion questions and did the prep sheets, kind of structure them for them. But later on, we actually had students create their own prep sheets. So one of the students would be a facilitator and they would kind of take ownership of the lesson that was coming up. How did you feel about that, Luzardi? Were you ever to get to that stage at BSAC, or do you plan to?
Yes, well, again, with my year 13s, I cannot praise that group enough. They have been fantastic. They actually humored me, like when I showed up when they were still in year 12, and I was like, guys, we're going to do this. And I think at first they thought Miss Fisher has truly lost the plot now, but they humored me and they went along with it. And in one of our last in our last two sessions, I actually just like gave them a poem for to prepare them for the unseen poetry section, and I assigned one of the students as the facilitator, and I was like, right, this is your role. Like you've got to come up with supporting materials, supportive articles, and another student was to come up with the prep sheet and the guidance sheet. And that bit was scary, I will be honest, because then you don't have much control in a Harkness session anyway. But now I've truly relinquished, in essence, all control over it. And I was a bit nervous. But you know what? The students really, really did an excellent job. And I was very, very proud of them, what they achieved. I think the mapping perhaps wasn't so good because one of the students asked if he could map the conversation. But because of Harkness, he was so engaged and he wanted to continue with the conversation. So he forgot to map half of the conversation. So the data on that one wasn't brilliant because he literally missed half
I've
of it.
actually done that myself. Yeah.
Exactly. And then and bless him, he did look up at me and he's like, Miss, this is not as easy as you make it look. And I was like, oh, well, thanks. But you should be like engaging with this at the moment. You should be listening to the data. And he's like, Miss, this is just, the Harkness is just too good. And yeah, no, like I said, that class, they were just fantastic. In fact, they threw a little birthday party for Harkness when it was BSAC's 1 year Harkness journey. They actually baked a cake. They brought in banners and stuff. So we celebrated Harkness. So that just goes to show the level of engagement and enjoyment that the students get out of Harkness.
Yeah, it really is fun. I was wondering, because we're seeing Harkness being used in sixth form. When we introduced Harkness in sixth form, we noticed that there was this kind of cliff that students were going off of, and they found it really intimidating at first. How would you scaffold those Harkness skills in Key Stage 3 and 4 so that students are much more prepared to engage in Harkness at that level when they get to sixth form?
So BSAC's actually operating a different RSC program in Key Stage 3 and 4. So the program that we're using really does prepare our students for it. So it's very much about cognitive acceleration, again, talking about it, again, no laptops. It is up to the students to like hone their RSC skills, and it's the program is designed to get the students to talk about a text and to question it. They're in much smaller groups than in Harkness. So with our RSC lessons, the students are a maximum of 4 per table, and then they get one text between the 4 of them, and they've got to read it together and they've got to discuss it. And then the teacher will ask a couple of questions, and then you'll get the students to think about it. And then when it comes to feedback, you don't actually ask a student. So you ask the students to number themselves 1 to 4, but you never then say, Todd, could you please give me the answer? You just then go, number 4 on this table, give me the answer. So I actually don't know who number 4 is because the students have self-selected. And then that way they then feedback. But it's very key for them not to say, oh, I thought this. It's our group thought this, or our group decided this. And then you, as a teacher, you then probe them. Oh, well, what made you think that? Or where is your evidence of this? So Key Stage 3 and 4, we run a slightly different RSC program to Harkness, but we feel that the RSC program that we run in Key Stage 3 and 4 very much prepares them for Key Stage 5, where we primarily use Harkness. I'm sure you can use Harkness lower down the school, but just at BSAC, because we have different RSC programs lower down the school, we use Harkness exclusively for Key Stage 5.
Interesting.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Go ahead, Todd. Do you want to ask the next few questions?
Yeah, no, so I was just going to say, obviously, me being this positive for this long is probably weirding you two out. It's not really on brand to not be so questioning of this, but I'm really excited. It sounds amazing. And I think it's probably time to go a little bit more on brand. I know I'm thinking of things I've launched, with my department, Lizardi, and I often feel I really need to get into the research and the why of it, and you've really covered the why. What's the research around Harkness? Say, is there a body of research that sort of supports its implementation, or is it one of those things that it'd be quite difficult to separate out from what you're doing in general?
No. There's loads of research on it. There's plenty of reading materials, there's books, and we actually have a resident expert in the UAE, in Dubai, Sarah Lambert. She is fantastic. She's done her master's in Harkness. So if you read her paper on it, it's very, very interesting. But there's plenty of other reading materials available. You literally just have to go onto Google Scholar or Google and type in Harkness, and you will be inundated with Harkness research. So it is not just one of those fluffy things where, oh yeah, this sounds great, let's all sit around a table and just have a discussion. It's very much not like that. It is rooted in research. And as Morgan explained earlier, like, this is not a new fad. It feels new to some people, but I mean, Harkness has been around for a very long time. Of course, it has changed. Perhaps it has morphed into something different, perhaps, than what they started out with at Phillips Exeter, but the core principles of Harkness, that hasn't changed. Like, that's still the same. But it's all about the metacognition. It's about enhanced learning. It's about mastery of the material. It's, as I mentioned before, cognitive acceleration. And it's, again, just giving the ownership to the students. But there is plenty of reading materials out there.
Okay, so if
Some of
anyone
the
was
reading
launching
materials.
this to
Oh,
a
sorry.
really, sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think some of the reading materials, it doesn't say the words Harkness, but you could find a lot under kind of like reasoned discourse. You could find a lot under like it's a mode of social inquiry. There's a ton of stuff on it. Kind of fits into like constructivism. And if you looked at kind of Vygotsky or let's see, even John Dewey, you'd find stuff that talks about how productive classroom talk and having that discourse actually enhances learning. So because of that, it doesn't feel like it's new. Harkness, the word, I think sometimes people think that is new, but I think when you talk about classroom discussion, there's a ton of research on how productive that is.
Yeah, tons. And I'm just thinking about those, difficult to win over or difficult to get buy-in from staff that, often once they've bought in are some of the most effective practitioners. But it's often those little things, isn't it? Having that, right, the effect size for this on the meta-analysis is whatever it is. It's those conversations that then make the staff buy in and people getting on board much, much easier. I know, Morgan, you wanted to talk about buy-in and implementation. Am I stepping on your toes now? Did you want to?
No, not at all.
So Luzadi, how do you get that staff buy-in for Harkness? What was your journey with it as a team?
Okay, well, we're still on the journey. It's very much still a journey. It's definitely not the finished product yet. But so when we obviously first decided, right, Harkness is what we want to do, I very excitedly bounded into my head teacher's office and I was like, right, I want to do this and this is how I want to do it. And I was like, yeah, we're going to roll it out to the whole school. And in his wisdom, he kind of sat me down. He's like, I think you need to just take a breather and maybe go and speak to some other schools and find out how they've done it. And that's what I did. And I'm so glad I did heed the warning. And some of them just said, like, you've got to start small. Like, don't go in whole hog. Don't go in like with the whole school. So what we did is I actually did Harkness by myself, like for 6 months. I was just trying to see how it works, trying to figure it out. I really wanted to become like an expert at it, as you guys said. Like, I really did want to make sure that if I'm going to include more people in this, I needed to know what I'm doing in order for me to be an effective leader, if you like, in this process. And then after that, I then asked for volunteers. So I literally just said, hi guys, this is what we're doing. And I would very much appreciate people to join me. And of course, the lovely English department, I had several volunteers from the English department. I had volunteers from the psychology department, who was also the head of sixth form. He volunteered. And then I had volunteers from the maths department, which I was ecstatic about because I thought, this is great. Now people will hopefully no longer just see this as an English thing if maths are involved, because you cannot get two subjects more different than these two. So I was like, great, we've got English, we've got maths, and this is where we are at the moment. So we've got psychology, English, and maths. We've really been working on Harkness, and we've been like observing each other, not as much as we want to, I will be honest, just because obviously the nature of the beast and being in education, we've not seen each other as much as we'd like to. And that's something that we're going to work on next year, is getting into each other's lessons more often, like they coming to see me, but also me going to see them. But very much at the moment, like, it was on a volunteer basis. And I am presenting to to the whole of BSAC staff on the 10th of June on on Harkness, and the hopes to actually get more volunteers. So we are doing a very, very staggered approach. We did not just go, right, this is what we want to do, and this is what we're doing. We want to make sure in order to get the staff buy-in that we kind of chip away at the process.
I think that's so important. When we did Harkness at my school, we did go kind of the entirety of the sixth form is going to be Harkness. They bought the tables and we came in, we had a trainer come in for a day. And what we found was that it didn't work. We did a review about 2 terms in of Harkness. And what we found was that a lot of teachers had reverted back to just kind of having students sit around the table while they stood up and kind of went back to, this is the starter, this is the plenary, this is the 2 main tasks you're doing. And it was just kind of a regular classroom with a round table that just happened to be in it. And it was because it really wasn't embedded. I think in the very first few weeks, it is really, really hard to do Harkness. And I think for both students and staff, the way that you mentioned. And so if they found that students weren't doing the prep work ahead of time, or if they found that students were really quiet and not responding, where they had to kind of fill in the spaces a lot of the time, so they wanted to make sure that there weren't any misconceptions that went unaddressed, staff would end up standing up and kind of taking over the classroom. And I think you really need that slow buy-in that's really authentic. And staff have to kind of volunteer. The students have to be kind of fully involved in participating and know what the expectations are in order for it to work. So yeah, I think that the way that you've gone about kind of slowly building up students and then also slowly kind of enticing staff to get involved is really, really wise. And it seems like you were doing Harkness in a really, really, again, an authentic way. We're just going to take a break now and listen to the news.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the 3-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC reports on proposed changes to sex and relationship education guidance for schools in England. According to the report on the news website, government sources have told the BBC about the plans, which include banning sex education for under 9s, as well as additional guidance for teaching about gender identity. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said the new guidance would ensure children were not exposed to disturbing content. Teachers have responded with concerns that some of the guidance appears contradictory and say there is no evidence of a widespread problem with current guidance. The new plans say secondary school pupils will learn about protected characteristics such as sexual orientation and gender reassignment, but makes it clear that schools should not teach about the concept of gender identity. It said it was right to take a cautious approach. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan, speaking on BBC Breakfast, said biological sex is the basis of relationship, sex and health education, not these contested views. ASCL's General Secretary said that it was important that banning the teaching of gender identity did not shut down discussion, and that young people must be able to discuss this without their teachers feeling in peril of saying something wrong. The new guidance also strengthens rules to make it easier for parents to access teaching materials to see what their children are learning, although many point out that this guidance is currently in place. Lucy Emerson of the Sex Education Forum said, If topics were to be restricted, it will leave children even more dependent on getting answers from online sources. The draft guidance is now open to a 9-week consultation, but once finalised, will be statutory. An outline of the proposed new age restrictions can be found on the BBC News website and the consultation on the Department for Education website. In the United States, pro-Palestinian protests at colleges and universities have made the news again, as some graduates from Duke University in North Carolina staged a walkout. The protest came just prior to a speech by veteran comedian Jerry Seinfeld, who was due to receive an honorary degree. Mr. Seinfeld has been a vocal supporter of Israel since the 7th of October attacks by Hamas. Some students stayed to hear the speech, but videos posted on social media also showed some booing and chanting slogans in support of Palestine. Whilst the ceremony at Duke went ahead, plans at other universities, including Columbia and the University of Southern California, have cancelled or restructured their main graduation ceremonies to avoid further complications. The Daily Mirror features comments from Strictly Judge Shirley Ballas about free school meals. She focuses on her own experiences of being raised by a single mother and says she understands what increasing numbers of British children living in poverty are going through. She recalls looking forward to her free school meal, referring to it as a nice lunch every day. At 63, Ms. Ballas is hoping to use her experiences to highlight the issue of poverty by being part of an ITV documentary called Kids in Poverty. According to the Mirror, 4.3 million children in Britain get their only meal a day at school. 30% of UK children are living below the poverty line, with 1 million classed as being in extreme poverty. Figures from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation say that the share of children living in absolute poverty has increased by 148% since 2017 and is at its highest level for 30 years. The documentary can be seen on demand, and full details of the article from the Mirror are on its website. Finally, students at Lancaster University have voted for all food served on campus to be plant-based, according to BBC Radio Lancashire. The Students' Union is supporting the gradual transition to 100% vegan menus, with a target of 50% by 2025 and 100% by 2027. A campaigner told the BBC that Lancaster University has a goal of net zero by 2035 and that implementing a plant-based catering system aligns with this goal. The Countryside Alliance said too few students had been involved in the decision, with 18 of the 19 delegates on the Students' Union Council, who do represent 13,000 students, voting to support the motion. But the Countryside Alliance called it an attack on freedom of choice and said the decision should have been put to a wider student vote. Universities including Stirling, Warwick and Newcastle have also voted to go plant-based, although Edinburgh rejected the plan. The votes have been organised following Animal Rising's Plant-Based Universities campaign. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Hello, welcome back. We are here with Luzardi Fisher talking about Harkness. And we were just looking at all the benefits of Harkness, but now why don't we take a look at the challenges of Harkness? Luzardi, I was wondering if you could take us through some of the common challenges for students, and then maybe let's take a look at some of the challenges implementing Harkness for staff.
Okay, right. So one of the main problems that we found with Harkness in the beginning was the students not engaging with the lessons. So like they've done the prep work, as I said, they're very keen, they've done the prep work, they've technically done all the hard work, but then in lessons they weren't necessarily that keen to share at first. So we actually started to play games with the students. So like actually around the oval Harkness table, like putting their hands out, starting to tap sounds, like to get them to listen to one another and to anticipate when the sound or the beat is coming their way. So we got them to play that game. We got them to look into each other's eyes, to make sure that they're doing eye contact properly, and try not to giggle. That silly game that we all used to play when we were young. And we also got there, so I had a tennis ball, and I would start a story with something silly, like there once was a dragon that was walking through the forest, and then I'd roll the tennis ball to the next student, then they've got to add to the story, and then they roll the ball to the next person, add to the story, and so forth and so forth. And then whoever gets the ball last, they've got to tell the whole story. So they had to listen to it. And obviously the others have to listen as well, because if the student is missing out any part of the story, they've then got to interject in that. So we kind of start to play games to get the students to loosen up a little bit. And then we found after that, like they would actually engage a bit more. As we mentioned earlier, the job cards do help a lot. If you assign those, that really, really helps with the students. And then I also found with my year 12s, my current year 12s, when we were having Harkness with them, the conversations were good, but they weren't necessarily as in depth as I would have wanted them. They weren't as rich as I would have needed them to be. So what I actually did is I had my year 13s do a Harkness lesson, and my year 12s were seated at the back, and they were observing the year 13s doing it. And then the following lesson, I actually had my year 12s around the table, but then I planted 3 of my really strong vocal year 13s in the group to kind of like help and model again, just like this is how we do Harkness. And I feel those strategies really worked. But those were like the main challenges that we had, is that the students just weren't engaging, and that the conversations weren't as deep. But I felt like after the games and after doing the modeling strategies, I felt that really, really helped with it.
Yeah, I think the modeling especially would be really key, because then they know what the expectations are. I was just wondering about like some of the major criticisms of Harkness. They're just kind of that it's a very prep heavy. So how do you do Harkness when it's so prep heavy for all of your lessons? And then the other criticism is simply about class sizes. How do you do Harkness when it's supposed to be done with between like 10 and 15 students tops? And a lot of our class sizes are much larger than that. So it's really hard to implement, especially further down a school when you have large classes. How would you kind of respond to those criticisms?
Right. So first of all, the prep heavy, I 100% agree with it. Like Harkness is really, really heavy. Now I know Philip Exeter, like every single lesson at Philip's Exeter is a Harkness lesson. So I think those students are, if you like, Harkness fit. Like they know how to do it and they're almost used to it. They're in a habit. Whereas with us, it doesn't work that way. So for us, we've timetabled it in once a fortnight per subject to allow a little bit of a break and allow the students to do that appropriately. So I think that kind of gets around the prep heavy element of it. Of course, different schools opt different methods, and I'm sure there might be other people who like approach it completely differently. But for us, like we felt that was really a way to like mitigate the exhaustion that our students are feeling. In terms of the large classes, again, because we are using Harkness mostly in our sixth form, our biggest classes are 16 students. So for us, 16 is it's a bit big for a Harkness, because I think the optimal amount is 12. I think if my memory serves, I think that's what it says on
Yeah.
the Philip Exeter website. It's 12 is the optimum one. So we are slightly bigger than that, but I feel 16 it still works. You can still have a really, really in-depth conversation at 16. However, I know there are schools in Dubai which operate Harkness even at Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 with classes much bigger than 16. And what they didn't do is they split the class into 2. So they've got, if you like, 2 Harkness sessions running at the same time. So you've got one half of the class. So let's say the class size is 28. They then split it into 14 and 14 around 2 tables. Or, well, they don't actually have tables. What they do is they actually use their desks, and they just pack the desks into a circle or into an oval, and they then have conversations like that. And then on the 2 groups, there is one student mapping the conversation instead of a teacher mapping the conversation. But that requires a lot of training for your students to make sure that they are up to the task. And I think it's truly exceptional to see, because I actually have observed some of those lessons in Dubai, and it was amazing to see. But that again does not happen overnight. Like that is months of hard work and training your students to do that.
I would love to see some of those lessons just because I've never seen Harkness in action at Key Stage 3. I've trialed it in a few times in Key Stage 4, but mostly just seen it in sixth form. But I think the idea of seeing younger students really engaged that would be
It
really, really interesting.
it was amazing. I observed a geography key stage 3 lesson. It was year 8. And I was sat at the back of the class and I was just observing these two Harknesses going on at the same time. And I was just like, this is impressive. It's amazing. But like I said, that does not just happen overnight. So yeah.
And so the next part of my question about challenges had to do with staff. So what are the staff challenges? Because I think school culture must really fit into this as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think, first of all, if you've got the backing from SLT, if you've really got the buy-in from staff, if you've got research backing you up, like you almost have to have an arsenal of defense ready to ward off any pessimism. I think that is the first step to help. But that's obviously, that's not going to work all the time. It'll help, but it potentially won't solve all the problems. And I think that's why we at BSAC, why we've done a really, really staggered approach, while we've gone really slowly. We've taken our time. First it was just me, then the next one, then the next one. So we've truly rippled it out over time to try and mitigate that pessimism. And as you said earlier, like trying to get people to be curious about it and to want to join in. And where we are now is like having our Harkness champions buddy up with new staff. So it's not necessarily just me leading it, but I lead the Harkness the Harkness champions, and they then buddy up with people, and they then kind of filter out and go forward. And just like one thing that we want to do next year is offer more training, just making sure, checking in on people, making sure that they're still adhering to the principles and revisiting the Harkness strategies, talking about like what issues or challenges people are having, very similar to a Harkness discussion, like discussing how we are seeing Harkness taking shape at BSAC. How can we make sure that it's working as well as we want it to work, because we know that this is a valuable teaching strategy, but just making sure that we get it to work fully. We've also compiled files for our staff, which is filled with resources, examples, research, as Todd asked earlier. So we've got all those files already. So we made those files bespoke to BSAC staff. So I know what we should be focusing on, what we need, and we've shared those files with them. It's a nice hard copy file, something that you can actually hold in your hands. Of course, we do share the electronic version with them. But I also just find sometimes, even if you share a hard copy file or you share digitally, sometimes, those files gather a little bit of dust on the shelf. So I think what we want to do next year is making sure we revisit the files, revisit the training more frequently, almost so that people can't really forget about it, that it's constantly like at the back of their minds.
Yeah, I think you've been really wise in your implementation. I think that your rollout has been really measured, and that's so important because you do want people to be curious and to really embrace it wholeheartedly. Because if you do it kind of half-hearted, I don't think that you get the full effect of Harkness whatsoever. So yeah, I think the way that you kind of slowly allow staff and students to kind of play with Harkness is really, really wise. Todd, did you have a few questions to ask about perhaps Harkness and tech?
Yeah, so I think we've sort it really, but obviously, we're all kind of constantly being encouraged to think about this expression that I love so much about 21st century skills. But I think there is obviously, we do need to something like Harkness, we do need to kind of justify it within that sort of technological space, and ensuring students are ready for the 21st century. That's where we live, by the way. How do we justify making space for Harkness in that context of a big push on digital and I'd say an obsession, to be perfectly honest?
Well, I think now is the most important time ever to teach our students to adapt, to be able to adapt to an ever-changing world. I mean, let's be honest, as you said, like in the 21st century, everything is changing pretty much on a daily basis. Like we are seeing AI like change and adapt like at a pace I think that none of us truly anticipated, or even the ones who didn't think it was going to happen the way it is. So I think we really need to make sure that our students are resilient, they are able to adapt to these changing areas, and also like excelling in an ever evolving workplace. Like a lot of our students will be operating in jobs that do not even exist yet, and how do you physically prepare them for that? Like we said earlier, like being able to talk to people, to actually communicate, to relate to others, to make sure that we can express ourselves in a clear fashion, make sure that we can seek clarification, that we can speak clearly, that we don't interrupt others, that we build on what others are saying, question and challenge while still in a respectful manner. Understanding facial expressions. I think if you're staring at a screen all day, you are losing that mindful communication. You're absolutely losing that if you don't do that. Just like minding your space, just knowing how to behave around others, no disruptive noises or no fidgeting, just making sure that you are workplace ready for whatever that workplace will look like.
Yeah.
It is really, really fascinating, actually, because I think it's so, so important that students have those skills to actually collaborate and learn from each other and listen to each other and co-construct an understanding, to challenge each other, to argue, but argue in a really constructive way. I was just wondering, when you were talking about those interactions, how do you balance a Harkness table when you might have students who have specific learning differences? I have students who are autistic, and so it's really hard for them to enter with full footing into a conversation or a discussion with other students. Are there any suggestions or strategies that you suggest, Lizardi, to help students enter in a more equal playing field?
Well, in terms of that, like, so let's say a student is autistic and they do not want to make eye contact. I'm definitely not going to force them to make eye contact in
Yeah,
terms of
yeah.
that, because that is a potential trigger and that's not something that you want. However, you would still ask them to at least have good posture and at least listen along, like nod, and just social cues really that they would need to have, regardless of their special needs, but also liaising with our SEN department, just making, like, talking to them, having conversations with them, because they really are the experts in terms of that and what our students really need, and then talking to them about how we can support our students, because this is something I'm very, very passionate about, but it's not something I can do by myself. I definitely don't claim to know all the answers to this. And I think you need to have a collaborative approach. So if there is a student in my class who has SEN, then I will reach out to the SEN department first and hear what they have to say. And then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I think that's a really tricky question because, again, you want to make sure that all students have the opportunity to participate fully and get all the benefits, but you never want to put them into a situation where they might feel uncomfortable. There's kind of like that perfect moment where you are comfortable to the point of being challenged, but it doesn't tip you to the over the edge of being triggered. So yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
that was very balanced. Yeah. Yeah. So we're just going to take a quick break here to listen to our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the 3-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
Okay, welcome back. So again, for those of you who are just tuning in, I'm here with Luzardi Fisher. She is going to be talking about Harkness, and I'm so glad we have you for a few more minutes just to look at Harkness and where it fits in to oracy as a larger picture. So I think that oracy is kind of on the rise across the UK, across Canada, across the US, as seen as this kind of silver bullet. Where does Harkness fit within oracy? Is it that different than oracy, or is it kind of a new evolution? Lizardi, what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't think, obviously, as you said earlier, it's definitely not new. It's been around for nearly 100 years. But I think the shape that it's taking is perhaps new. As we mentioned earlier, the emergence of the apps to support Harkness. I don't think Harkness, the man, when he created this, I don't think he was fully anticipating all of this happening with his idea. So I think that is truly empowering both teachers and staff. So it's enabling us to truly harness that RSC and making sure that we are getting the most out of our out of our I'm sorry, out of our lessons. And yeah, so I think that's the biggest thing, because Voice 21 is an initiative, whereas Harkness is a teaching strategy. So sometimes, the quiet students really do surprise you. So I think it's giving each student that voice, enabling them or giving them the space to actually write, or actually giving them the space to voice their own opinions and actually have that. Like I said, I've seen in some Harkness lessons some of the quieter students, like they actually enjoy Harkness because they know that this is a safe space and that they can share their ideas, that others will respect them. It's almost like they will be okay with this, because we actually did a bit of data before and after our Harkness lessons. And one of my questions was like, have you noticed any improvements in your ability to express your thoughts and ideas during Harkness? And that improved significantly by our students. So even the ones who initially you perhaps would have anticipated that they be um, wouldn't be able to engage as much, they really truly did. So I feel that Harkness is just another string to the RSC bow.
And I think the flattening of the hierarchy there, the fact that it is everyone, I'm just going off what you've described today, and I'm no expert, but the flattening of that hierarchy, thinking about for those students who maybe aren't 100% confident on their ideas, that particularly in, I'm thinking of our subject here, Lizardi, when they're in their deep analysis, they've had an idea and it's on the tip of their tongue, and they're not sure if they should say it because the teacher's leading things, and what if they get it wrong and everyone's going to look at them. But if the hierarchy is that bit flatter, then potentially that frees them up a little bit. And I can see that would actually be really beneficial, particularly in our subject, but I'm sure in lots of subjects, actually.
Yeah.
You also go on, no, please.
No. I was just about to say, like, on other subjects, I think obviously we said earlier, like Philip Exeter teaches Harkness in every subject, so you can make it work in every subject. But I think if someone was to say to me like 2 years ago that a maths lesson in Harkness would work, I think I would have told them, no way, it doesn't work like that. Maths doesn't, it's not an RSC subject. It doesn't work like that. And I was like, no. After seeing it, first of all at BSAC, second of all in schools in Dubai, I can 100% see the value in that. But a maths Harkness is slightly different to an English Harkness, because as we said, like an English Harkness, or in a humanities subject as well, other subjects are available. You can sit around a round table or around the oval table and you'll have discussions. Whereas with maths, the students go and they write on the whiteboards first and they do their calculations and they explain their working out methods to each other at the boards. And then at the end of that, they then come together and then they talk about the processes that they've been through, which ones they found more useful, which ones perhaps they would have changed, or which ones they would have done differently. Like it's slightly different, but it's still all RSC, and it's still student focused, student led. So I think people like I genuinely think that Harkness works for every subject. I think there's just finding the way that Harkness will work for you in your subject. And again, when I attended the training in Dubai for Harkness, it was fantastic because there were English lessons, there were psychology lessons, there were music lessons, there were maths ones, there were geography. Now, obviously, I'm not a specialist in any of those subjects, yet I participated in every single thing, and I felt that I learned something in each of those sessions. So I think it truly is about the teacher selecting the correct material, the teacher supporting the students with the prep sheets, and then just enabling the students to have those discussions. So I think I really do believe that Harkness can work in every subject. It's just about how you make it work.
Yeah, and you've touched on there as well the importance of oracy, and this sounds like it gives it a real structure to that, because I'm sure, like most people now, if I go to a restaurant and there's a family at another table, the number of families on iPads, and I'm hesitant to criticize any parents, but that just wasn't a thing when we were younger. You sat around and you did play those silly games that you mentioned earlier, and you grew a bit more confident at potentially making a bit of eye contact or jumping in if your parents were discussing something quite serious that they'd seen in the news, or whatever those discussions were. And potentially, students aren't having those experiences of structured talk in the way that they maybe were when we were younger, just because of the way technology's developed and the way things have changed. And that's not a judgment on my part, certainly not. If I had any hair to tear out, sometimes having a conversation with my children at the table would cause me to tear out the last few threads. But it is really important. I think you've spoken really eloquently about that, and hopefully we've exemplified decent turn taking and listening here tonight, because it is such an important life skill, as well as a great tool for what happens in our classrooms. Morgan, I talk too much. We've grilled Lizardi, but it's only because this is such a fantastic initiative and Lizardi's so knowledgeable. Was there anything else you wanted to bring round to the table?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to kind of close out by asking Zardi a little bit about power dynamics. When I look at Harkness, I think a lot about how we're kind of subverting power dynamics. The teacher is no longer the only one standing in the classroom. They're literally sitting with students at the same level. Everyone's at the same level. Um, what do you think Harkness does to power dynamics in the classroom? Do you think that it equalizes them? You mentioned equity before and how you can actually try to measure that it's something that students all work towards. What does that mean in the classroom? Why is it important?
Well, so it is important. So you don't have, as I said earlier, so you don't have one student dominating the entire conversation, because as Todd also said earlier, it's not really about one person having all the answers. That's not what Harkness is about. It's about coming with an idea and then constructing an answer to it. So I will have an idea, Todd will have an idea, you will have an idea. We will sit and we will talk about our ideas, and then we will reach a conclusion, and we will find the best answer. But we all would have expressed ourselves eloquently and thoughtfully and concisely. We would have done all of those, because that then ultimately strengthens our writing as well. Because just remember, I started off by saying that Harkness, the whole point that we initially wanted to do Harkness is, yes, the oracy is absolutely, it's very important. But for us, it was to make sure that students are able to write confidently, because if you can speak about something confidently, you can write about it confidently. And I just think with that, you give equity to all the students by not having just one student who's usually the bright spark in the class dominating the conversation. No, we are all equal here. We all aim to speak at the same percentage. And as we said, the apps allow us to track that and to monitor that. Because I show my students the app at the end of the lesson, and I will say to them, guys, this was an excellent Harkness. If you look at the pie chart, because each student is assigned a color, so if you look at the pie chart, the slices will indicate. And then sometimes there is a student who's dominated and their slice is a bit too big. And instead of that being a good thing, it's actually like, oh, perhaps I should have thought more carefully about what I wanted to say or how I wanted to say it. Perhaps I shouldn't have spoken for 9 minutes. Maybe I could have condensed my ideas down to 2 minutes. I think it's truly that. It's about students being very thoughtful about what they're saying, choosing what they want to say, not just saying stuff and filling up a space. Because I think that's the other thing. I know we said about that earlier, when you feel uncomfortable in that moment of silence when no one is speaking, students almost have to become comfortable with that silence as well. It's okay to sit there for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute in silence to gather your thoughts, to think about saying something worth value instead of just saying something for the sake of it. That's the whole point of it. It's we have to be thinking about our thinking, of course, and then coming up with a solution together.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.